Hello friends, welcome back to next video lecture. In this video we are going to discuss about a classifier. It is called as SVM in short. It is the abbreviation of support vector machine. So support vector machine, it's a powerful supervised algorithm. So supervised means it has a training process or labeling with the data that works well with smaller data set, but with the complex one in which the data sets are not easier to be classified. Used for both regression and classification, but it is preferred as a classifier. It is famous since 1990s and more effective with tuning process. It is a supervised machine learning problem where we try to find a hyperplane that best separates two classes. In perceptron, we saw a separating line in a graph that actually separates the samples, right? So it is a separating line that we saw in perceptron. It's a two-dimensional, but in SVM we use three-dimensional. So in three-dimensional means it will have a hyperplane. It will have a hyperplane. So what is the difference between logistic and SVM? So logistic regression, it is a probabilistic technique, and SVM is a statistical model. Both are similar without kernel, but when kernel is used, SVM is actually better. For small and complex data set, we go for SVM. Okay, what are the types of support vector machines? So there is a linear SVM, in linear SVM, the data is perfectly linearly separable data, right? Say the data has positive numbers and negative numbers. Easy to separate positive and negative numbers, right? So if you use that type of a data set, then we go for linear SVM. But what is non-linear SVM is the data set is not linearly separable. It is not in the linearly separable format, right? Means we cannot say the data set has say only positive and negative values, or it may be a combination of positive negative values, and it is very difficult to separate, or classify. For that type of data set we go for non-linear SVM. So there are two types. One is linear SVM and another one is non-linear SVM. So this is the graph of SVM, support vector machine. It somewhat looks like regression graph, right? It has x1, it has x2, but what is different here is it has a positive hyperplane, as you can see, and negative hyperplane, as you can see, and there is a maximum margin hyperplane between positive and negative hyperplane, and there is a margin which is the distance between the negative hyperplane and the positive hyperplane. Here in this graph, the green balls are one type of samples, and blue hexagons are different type of samples. They are being actually separated by the hyperplane. Okay, they can be two classes. So here we can see, here there is a hyperplane, unlike the perceptron where there was only separating lines. So we can understand from this graph that in SVM we have to have a positive hyperplane, we should have a negative hyperplane, and the more far the positive and negative hyperplane, that could separate the two different type of samples. If the positive and negative hyperplane, or the margin we call, when it is very small, then we can see the contamination of the sample, so it becomes you know very difficult to classify. So the margin has to be very high in order to classify the samples efficiently. Okay, so that is about the SVM. So in SVM there is a hyperplane, positive hyperplane, negative hyperplane, and the distance between positive and negative hyperplane is called as the margin. Okay, and the margin has to be maximum for the better classification. So in next video lecture we can see a more detail about the SVM, how we can apply SVM to a particular example. Thank you.